Back in my early 20s, roughly the mid 80s, I lived on Chicago's near north side, part of town called Edgewater, and as the name suggests, it ran flush with Lake Michigan. Rough and tumble neighborhood. I paid about $400 for a studio apartment per month, and I would ride the subway, the elevated, the Chicago L, up and down, north side, midtown, downtown. And a week wouldn't go by without people looking, pointing, whispering among themselves. And at least once or twice a week, someone would literally come up to me, say something like, "I don't mean to be rude or nothing, but you look just like that Bruce Willis." Hello and welcome to the No Hair All Heart podcast. I'm your no hair host, at least now. But back then I had hair, and I want to talk about when I looked like Bruce Willis, what that meant, and why somehow it translated to the best graffiti I have ever seen in my entire life. In the 80s, Bruce Willis was the Jimmy Stewart of the age, the everyman, the dude next door. And like Stewart was for Hitchcock, Bruce Willis was for a number of directors in his ability to go all over the place and rock it. He was the irascible, cynical detective in Moonlighting, where he started on television. And at the time, there was a firewall between TV and movies. This was way pre-digital. And you could be a real success in television, as Bruce was, but there was no way you could cross over into film. And that had a lot to do with just the physicality of media at the time. You had broadcast TV. I remember having three main broadcast channels: CBS, NBC, ABC, Channel 2, Channel 5, Channel 7 in Chicago growing up. There was WGN-TV, Channel 9, which was the local Chicago channel. The others were both local, sometimes for the news, and also national. There was WTTW, Channel 11, which was the public broadcasting channel with some of my favorite shows, actually, like Nova, the science documentary. You had Channel 26, which was the Latin Spanish-speaking channel. And if you could get your antenna right, not too much white noise, you might be able to get Channel 52, I think, which had some religious programming. But that was really it. There was no such thing as digital on demand. So you saw what they blasted at you, and your selection ability had to do with literally just getting up off your ass and changing the channel. Once a week, you got the TV Guide, which was a calendar of sorts, listing days and times. And the times and the channels corresponded to what they were throwing at you. If you wanted to see a movie, then you would go to the theater on the weekend, usually, and you would sit on your ass in a theater, and then they would play you a movie. And if you wanted to see the movie again, you had to wait. You had to wait anywhere from a few months, maybe as long as half a year or even a year for it to get to TV. They would chop it up into 12 or 20-minute blocks to pepper it with commercials. And they would edit it for TV. So not only in format, but in content. You know, you couldn't F-bomb. You couldn't show any nudity, which might have crossed over into the R rating. And that was it. That was your media. I remember for the first time, I think it was in high school, I went to the friend of a friend's house, and she had a Betamax player. I'd never seen one of those. It was almost the size of a piece of luggage, weighing 3 times as much. And she had a shelf upon which were these little boxes, and those were movies. I couldn't believe it. She said, "What would you want to watch?" And I said, "You can actually choose what you want to see?" This was unbelievable. And she reached on the shelf and she picked a movie and put it in this big piece of luggage, and it ate it. And all of a sudden on her TV, there was playing a movie at her behest. Wow. So that's how I grew up, and that's where Bruce Willis evolved from. And as I'm mentioning, movies in theaters, broadcast TV, and there was a church-state divide between these. They took a risk with Bruce, who was a big hit on this TV show, and they cast him in the role of John McClane, a New York cop coming to California to visit his ex-wife, ostensibly to kiss and make up. She was a huge corporate success. He was just a NYPD detective cop, blue-collar kind of guy. She was sophisticated. He was a brute. Of course, they would bang spectacularly, but when it came to everything else, forget about it. It was self-evident, the dynamics of their relationship. No need to go too further than that. But you could also see that the guy wanted to reconcile a bit. He had a bit of a heart underneath his sweaty wife-beater t-shirt, his Stanley Kowalski demeanor. And the setup was perfect. To this day, it's the ultimate Christmas movie because it takes place during the holiday night. It was a brilliant film in lots of ways, and it solidified Bruce Willis as the action hero. He was the regular guy with charisma, with grit. He was believable. He was funny. He was cynical. He was soft-spoken. He was the testosterone oozing ape that you couldn't help but adore. And from then on, it was the sky's the limit. Arguably because of his everyman Jimmy Stewart quality, he succeeded in multiple genres in film too, which is also rare. You had comedies like Look Who's Talking, you had science fiction, notably the freaky fun of The Fifth Element, 12 Monkeys kind of experimentation. Then you had the thriller like The Sixth Sense, wow. And then when his career started to ebb a little bit, the guy was smart. He took some risks, and Pulp Fiction boosted him back up. And it was off to the races all over again. All told, if you look at the IMDb or Box Office Mojo, films with Bruce Willis as the lead have net $5 billion, which is pretty good for a guy who grew up in Akron, Ohio, watched the workers line up with their lunch pails at the Goodyear tire factory and told himself, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I'll do anything except that. Packed it up, moved to New York City. He was a bartender, I believe, for years. Auditioned in shows, and then magic happened. You could always say retroactively that it was meant to be, but I don't know. We might live in the multiverse, and he made it, everyone else made it, in every permutation. We happen to live in a universe where Bruce made it. Woohoo! And made it he did. As we all know, he's recently been suffering from a bad form of dementia. And after spawning, I think, 5 kids, maybe, from 2 women, 2 families, I'm sure they're all hovering around him, giving him support. He was one of those guys where he was similar off screen as he was on. He was a little bit rough around the edges, allegedly, but he wasn't a bust out jerk like a lot of celebrities are. And he kept that everyman look and appeal both on screen and off. And as he lost his hair, I lost my hair too. I think he's about 10 years older than I am. But we still kind of look alike. I think I looked more like him with hair. And we both had the receding hairline in the same kind of way, so it was fairly convincing. I remember back in the look who's talking to age. Wow, this must have been like 1980. This is a little bit after the time I'm talking about when I got called out on the Chicago subway. I think we're looking at like 1989. I was at the Regency Hotel in Hollywood for a business function. And we were across the lobby, kind of open restaurant buffet area. And our business function shared the waffle bar with a party that was being held on the opposite side, which was a look who's talking to launch party, it seemed. So I went over to the waffle bar and I'm standing in line, and then over my left shoulder, I hear this very effeminate voice complain. It was something like, isn't mine ready yet? And I think to myself, oh my God, really? For a waffle? And I turn, and it's John Travolta. And this again was his look who's talking to phase. His career was kind of tanking. Pre-Pulp Fiction, where he was revitalized and Bruce was revitalized, but this was pre-revitalized, kind of tanking John Travolta. And, I gracefully let him cut in front of me because he had a sense of urgency vis-a-vis that waffle. And he took his waffle and started walking through the main aisle with tables on either side of him. And I didn't really care what kind of waffle I got. I got a waffle, and I plopped some blueberries on there, and I followed John, in a sense, off the dais of this buffet table. And it's easy to be kind of paranoid in these kind of settings, and you don't really know how to take them. But I distinctly saw everyone looking up and waving at me. And I could tell that John, who was a few feet ahead, was irked by this because the attention and energy were going to me and not him. He was the star, and who the fuck was this guy? And I was wearing a pinstripe suit, and I was about 24, 25 at the time, with hair. And I got the distinct feeling that Chrissy Alley and her table and, all the paparazzi and the stars, people thought I was Bruce Willis coming down from the waffle bar. And I was getting all the love that John didn't seem to get. And I remember just kind of segueing off to the side because, again, our business function was in another area of this kind of open air lobby buffet area. And I remember all the eyes kind of following me, and I remember John turning and giving me this savage look. Like, I was pretty sure he knew I wasn't Bruce. So it was like a double whammy for Johnny. It was like, you fucking idiot, where did you come from? And you're not even Bruce, and you're getting more attention than I am. So I thought that was a funny, now almost apocryphal story. But I digress. I'm using this to illustrate the raw power of Bruce Willis, even at that time, and the feeling that you get when you have a doppelgänger out there who is a celebrity. We all dream, in a sense, of being famous. And in another podcast I did a few days ago, I talked about the AJR song, I'm Not Famous, and how I love that because we could all relate to it. And in a culture here in America, which experiences, as Umberto Eco mentioned, hyperhistory, and by that, Eco intimates that we've really been a country only for about 200, 250 years, and we're a country of emigres for the most part. And compare that to really the bedrocks of what we consider civilization, the UK, France, Germany. You've got rooted folks for 1,000, 2,000 years going back to the Gauls, the Romans. You've had conquest and war and migration, of course, in Europe. But when you really look at the historical landscape, America is new. America is diverse. We're a country of immigrants. And we really don't have our own history, at least not that deep and entrenched and rooted. So as a compensation for that, Eco coined the term hyperhistory. We're hyperhistorical. And part of hyperhistory is this paucity or complete lack of royalty. We had the aristocrats and the robber barons of the 19th century. But we've never really had kings and queens. We've had presidents, but they're transitory figures. And they're not bequeathed by birth, which has that kind of magical, fatalistic, destined quality to them. And we've been missing that sense of American royalty, the kings and queens and princes and princesses. And in lieu of that, we have substituted celebrity stars, most notably on screen, the film star, the movie star. And if I get my history right, the first screen star who had a name had the mellifluous sounding name Florence Lawrence. What a name, Florence Lawrence. She was exactly what you'd expect. Peroxide blonde in a stunny kind of way, especially when the film was literally just chemically developed frame by frame, and it was obviously black and white. So Florence Lawrence was the hot blonde. And even back then, the precedent was set for the war between stars and studios. The studios refused to give stars named credits because they were apprehensive, and justifiably so, and it doesn't take a business genius to figure it out or predict it. If you give stars names, then they become brands, and then you need to pay them more. If they're anonymous people, even ones who become familiar and regular, so the audience was expecting so and such and so and such, they weren't identified by name, because then that would give the stars power, and the studios wanted to retain that power. So finally, the inevitable gave in. People identify with other people, and in a hyper-historical culture, the idea of the celebrity, the movie star, was inevitable and necessary emotionally for Americans. So Florence Lawrence was the first one, and she became a star. And soon after that, Charlie Chaplin, and the list goes on and on. Now, fast forward to our time, and this hasn't changed at all. I mean, think about your own crushes, depending on your sexual orientation, depending on how you self-identify, and depending on even your interests. I knew a guy in California years and years ago, and he put it the best. He was a very, very effeminate queen, and I remember sitting with him in a sports bar, and we were watching television and drinking beer, and he matter-of-factly looked up. It was a moment's respite from a loud and noisy game, which was incongruous with the company at the time. And there was an advertisement for a sitcom or a rom-com. And then he put it best, and I'll never forget it. He said, "There's only two types of people that I care about when I watch TV. Those who I want to have sex with, and those who I want to be like." So in his case, it was the hot guys he wanted to screw. And the hot women were the individuals that he projected himself onto by want of attracting the hot guys. But we're all like that. Who do you want to sleep with and who do you want to be? And most of our entertainment is built around that. Like conversely, you could be a testosterone oozing male heterosexual and you love Tom Cruise. Why? Because he's Top Gun. Because he is that guy who fights and wins. Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And who do you want to have sex with? Well, there's always the starlet conveniently placed into the film to keep your interest long enough. I had another friend who said that he loved to watch James Bond movies because he was the ultimate dude. The guy would 1 second be wasting his enemies and at the other screwing their spies. Sex and death. Not only the American way, but the Darwinian axiom for survival. So, all right, America, we worship our celebrities. Our celebrities are royalty. And in a sense, celebrities are transcendent. There's a weird quality to celebrities where you don't actually see them. You see their avatar, their representation. If you've ever met a celebrity in person, you do a double take for a number of reasons. First, that fourth wall tumbles down. And perception and reality suddenly blend in the real world. That's number one. So the avatar that's out there that's being replicated like a meme, it is a meme. Hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of times. Billions. You might even say trillions of impressions of Madonna. How she looks, how she dances, videos, her music, her voice are replicated and re-replicated and reverberate inside the brains and hearts of billions of people over and over again in all these different forms, like a funhouse mirror of super memification. That avatar out there is busy. But there's a Madonna, she's a person. And when the two worlds come together, when you actually meet or see a celebrity, and it's most fun out of context. When I lived in LA, we used to play this game that, if you get invited to the Oscars and you're sitting there in the fourth row and then some hyper celebrity like Michael Jackson is 20 feet from you, you get some points. You're in the same room as Michael Jackson. You're exchanging the same oxygen. But that's nothing in celebrity points compared to, let's say, you're on Melrose Avenue and you go into a hardware store and you're in one of the back aisles by the plumbing supplies and you run into Michael there. That's a celebrity spotting for this very reason, that the more these two worlds diverge, the more spectacular that convergence. Everyone knows Michael Jackson in so many different ways, and recently, good, bad, and pretty ugly. But there he is. He's shopping for screwdrivers. I don't know. But that kind of juxtaposition is what makes celebrity spotting so very, very interesting. Kind of a religious experience. I remember the first celebrity that I ever saw, and I used to watch, again, on Chicago TV, I think it was on Channel 9, WGN, as I mentioned, BJ and the Dragon. And it was this dude. He was young too, like maybe in his 20s, but he was like a big guy for me then when I'm like, 5, 6, 7 years old. And the show was once a week and it had a bunch of puppets and fake sets. And there was a dragon named BJ and he was kind of the dragon handler. And it was kind of a combination of the Banana Splits. I don't know if you remember that, with all the psychedelic, crazy sets and monsters and animals and dancing and singing. with Mr. Rogers. That was BJ and the Dragon. Now, we lived near what at the time would be considered like a strip mall supermarket, an outdoor mall out in the North Chicago suburbs. And we went to go see a live performance of BJ and the Dragon. And if I remember, it was part of some bigger festival. It was a holiday like Easter. I don't think it was Christmas, but one of the holidays. And BJ and the Dragon would be there, and maybe some other celebrities. These local celebrities would be there, local DJs. And my father took me. He had an Impala car. I remember sitting in the back seat, and we went to go see BJ. And right when we got out of the car, my father taps me on the shoulder, and he goes, in Hungarian, he says, look, there he is. And I'm like, who? What? And sure enough, the car that pulled right next to ours, it was just like my dad's car. Out comes BJ, the guy on the TV. He was real. And I couldn't believe it. My jaw dropped. It was just like an alien just descended. The high priest of whatever was there. And I remember he came up to me. I'm like this little kid, and I'm looking at him. And he greeted me. He goes, "Hi there." And I think I remember he extended a hand. And I couldn't take it. I was just mortified. And I could tell BJ was like, oh, the kid is starstruck. How cute is that? And he just waved and he wandered off. And I think my father, true to form, chastised me. He was like, why didn't you talk to him? Why didn't you ask him something? Why didn't you get a free prize? I remember he berated me after this, like he did for everything. There's podcasts and blogs committed to that dynamic too. So everything was true to form, but that was my first celebrity sighting, and it was like a spiritual experience. I'll never forget it. So where am I getting at with all of this? Well, what I'm getting at is I grew up, again, maturing into adulthood looking like Bruce Willis, and Bruce Willis was the star at the time. And whether it was riding the Chicago subway and having people come up to me and say, hey, I don't mean to be rude or nothing, but you'd look just like that Bruce Willis. And this feeling that this doppelganger was out there kicking ass and taking names. And not that it necessarily made me feel like just an everyday dweeb, but I felt all these things, which is like, why do we live the lives that we do? Why do we make the choices that we make? How much of our lives is really just a crapshoot? And I was already thinking about this multiverse kind of stuff. Like, here I am, we resemble each other pretty much at random. I mean, people look like other people. There are apps where you just put in your selfie and then all of a sudden, you're 5 shades of Photoshop away from whomever. That's an old app. I bet you they still do this. And now with AI, it takes about a nanosecond for one of the data centers to take your face and literally put you into movie scenes dynamically. So you could be anyone you want to be. And even the idea of a resemblance becomes superfluous because now AI has brought the multiverse into our universe. Everything is possible and everything is real, and you're basically just a prompt from whatever you want. But that all said, there's this kind of weird connectivity. And at the end of the day, I don't really care. I mean, so what? Bruce Willis was entertaining. I'm never a fan of celebrities. Maybe of artists. I became a fanboy of Yngwie Malmsteen and Eddie Van Halen on guitar. I just thought that they were virtuosos who cut their own swath, and I played guitar. I've admired writers, as I've pointed out. Thomas Pynchon, big fan of him. William Gibson, big fan of him. Jorge Luis Borges. So when you're interested in stuff, you become you become idols. And in a recent podcast, I talked about how several of my former idols are no more. I broke up with them. So we have these attachments to celebrities because they embody, remember the Queen sitting there in the sports bar, laying it out in binary fashion. There are those I want to sleep with, and there are those I want to be like. And our idols fall into the latter category. Usually, it would be delightful if we had a combo, right? Although I can't imagine sex with Thomas Pynchon being particularly satisfying for either one of us. But that all said, the people we want to be like and the people we posit ourselves as liking and becoming, the lightness of being seen through the eyes of people who have done things that we might want to do or extol virtues that we consider useful or valuable. And we can't help it. I think we're programmed into this. I think we have a social Darwinian instinct wired into us from a tribal point of view that we look up, not down. And this idea of emulation is really a form of learning now, isn't it? That's how information gets passed. And we need emotion. We need intentionality to give it some zip, make it stick. I remember working with an advocacy group, and I helped them pitch in Steven Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, philosopher, neuroscientist, to get on their board. And there was a fundraising event with Pinker in attendance. And I'm very familiar with Pinker's debate with Daniel Dennett about the nature of sentience, intelligence, as related to artificial intelligence as well, computational cognition. And the essence of their disagreement is that Daniel Dennett has always been on the side of intentionality, that you can't build a machine that doesn't desire or have a goal or want something. It'll just be stewing in its own cognitive brilliance, and what's the point? To Dennett, if I get it right, intentionality is central. Is that you need a goal, you need to strive for something, and in a sense, your sentience is an emergent phenomena coming out of your raw cognitive capabilities, which in turn are actually developed and evolve within an ecosystem where you have a need, the system is literally trying to kill you, and you need to fight for your survival, and in that conflict, in that drama, you become a conscious, self-aware entity. And Steven Pinker on the other side is, nah. So a bunch of people had hovered around Steven Pinker talking about celebrity, intellectual pundit celebrity sightings or beings or hanging out with. And they were all trying to impress Pinker because I've seen this happen over and over again, especially with young people, that you have some intellectual powerhouse in attendance. And then you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get into a conversation with Steven Pinker. So it was that kind of vibe. And I personally hate that kind of shit. To me, that's worse than like standing in line for an autograph. So I was aloof from this, not only because I was part of the advocacy group and, I just had to maintain my tactful distance, but also I was thinking, come on, guys, it's like he doesn't give a shit. But Steven was entertained. I'm sure he gets this all the time, and he's a professor, he's a teacher. So all these guys, mostly guys, were all hovered around him, hurling phenomenology at Steven Pinker. And I overheard their conversation, and it shifted into artificial intelligence. And this was actually back in 2019. It was pre-pandemic by about a year or two, and in New York. And from the dugout, I shout over into the group, Pinker in the middle. It was like a football huddle. Maybe a dozen what might be called the pseudo intellectuals, right? And I don't mean to be disparaging for these folks. I mean, it's great. How often can you debate, an intellect like that? And I shout into the group from the dugout, intentionality. And Pinker's eyes lit up. And, he's got this huge bouffant of Albert Einstein hair and a big schnoz. And he lifted his index. He stopped the conversation, lifted his index finger, slowly and almost deliberately, dramatically turned his head toward me, looked at me, and pointed, "No, it's not." And there was a moment's silence, and they all went back to arguing about the nature of artificial intelligence. So that was, again, another funny kind of thing. But what the hell was I talking about? I was talking about celebrities, and I was talking about the nature of intent. So here I was, going full circle here, getting misidentified or mistaken for Bruce Willis on the Chicago Elevated, seeing this guy being taken for him. And my feelings about him, as I mentioned, are kind of neutral. I mean, as some of his movies I liked, especially Fifth Element and Pulp Fiction, but so what? And here I gotta awkwardly, maybe even ad hoc, a deus ex machina, fucking bad segue to my favorite piece of graffiti ever. Around this time, I am in a Rush Street bar, and I am standing at a stall taking a leak. And this is one of those filthy, noisome bars. You don't know when it was cleaned. You don't care. That's the whole motif. It's the old ambiance of a disgusting piss pod. And the wall is absolutely covered with layers of graffiti, like generations of graffiti. A palimpsest of vulgarity and dirty doodling. And as I'm passively urinating and looking up and scanning the vulgar cartoons and for a good time call phone numbers in just kind of a matter-of-fact Sharpie script with no capitalization, I see 3 words written so simply, so obscurely, not even trying to get attention, just kind of there. Like the guy was doing the same thing I am, who knows, 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago. And he reaches into his pocket with his free hand. And with that free, non-pissing hand, he takes out a Sharpie. I don't know why he would have it. Maybe for this glorious purpose. And writes on that wall. Again, no capitalization, not even script, just simple block letters, lazy, sloppy, but discernible, decipherable. 3 words. Bruce Willis sucks. And since then, I don't know, like 25 years, 30 years more has elapsed. I remember it like it happened yesterday, 5 minutes ago. And I love this so much. To me, it's just a symbol of truth penetrating the densest of fogs. Does this mean that Bruce Willis actually sucks? No, I think he's fine. What's wrong with Bruce Willis? I don't care anyway. So it's not about the truth or falsehood of the statement, Bruce Willis sucks, but it's about this guy standing there pissing, taking it upon himself to just express himself to the world. And yeah, it's an opinion. It's like leaving a mean comment on YouTube. And it comes from pretty much that same source. And there's nothing noble or bold or original in any of that. And now it's become absolutely ubiquitous to the point where it's just grievously annoying. But back then, there's something pure and even joyful about this guy just going above and beyond to, with zero fanfare, express himself in the purest, most direct way possible. James Joyce, I think, would have had a similar reaction to seeing this. The pure simplicity of this. Bruce Willis sucks. No capitalization, no punctuation, no period, not even horizontally aligned with the floor, no sense of purpose or direction. It was kind of like diagonal, which fit like he's lifting his arm up while he's pissing, and then you can't exactly draw in a straight line. It kind of arcs with your arm moving through space-time, scrawling indelibly, eternally, these glyphs, coded, saturated with meaning. Bruce Willis sucked, and I love that so much. Not even in a self-deprecating way, but for all the reasons I've been going on and on here, I've got this connection to Bruce. And my father, he died of Parkinson's disease. I believe a mutation of Parkinson's, like a submutation in the 17th chromosome, Parkinsonium 17. At least I did a little research where he got the shakes, but also Alzheimer's like brain degeneration. And Bruce is obviously going through his own dementia, his frontal lobe dementia, arguably variations of the same kind of cognitive decline, whether plaque is building up in the brain or proteins or gut bacteria or who knows what. They'll figure it out eventually, just as they'll build a artificial generative intelligence, artificial general intelligence soon enough. But anyway, Bruce is losing it. My father lost it. I did 23andMe, and after the FDA cracked down and then they gave them some slack, genotype, phenotype, and based on your code, they could predictively, run some evaluation with your DNA. And they, matter of fact, asked me in an email, now that the FDA had given them some slack, this was several years ago, before they went broke, before I took back my information, probably after they had already downloaded it and sold it to the highest bidder. But anyway, this email asked me if I should check for Parkinson's disease. And I didn't even think about it. I just said, sure. I had asked myself many times while my father was going through what he was doing, if I would know that I would get what he's got, would I want to know? Like, yes or no, if it's binary. Like, you either got the gene defect or you don't. And who knows the exact percentage probability, like anywhere from 20 to 50%, maybe higher. And I said, yeah, why not? And drum roll, please, it came back negative. Now, is that definitive? Is it decisive? Did I dodge that bullet of my father's later life Parkinsonian 17 dementia combo? Well, the jury's probably still out in a formal scientific way. If I wanted to, I could get another test and they might be able to evaluate it closer. But I have to say that was a huge sigh of relief. So, despite my resemblance to Bruce Willis, despite my genetic connection, obviously, to my own father, I've dodged several bullets, I think, which is staying sane and and staying me. If there is a multiverse and we're all repeated endlessly in an infinite number of universes and infinite variation, that there's no real upper boundary to possibility and it keeps repeating and our lives are just a matter of quantum probabilities, well, fuck it. Here I am yakking into this microphone. There's Bruce, ready to check out. My father dying years ago. And there's that guy taking a piss in that Rush Street bar, angling his free arm up with the Sharpie, writing, Bruce Willis sucks. And in this infinite infiniverse of possibility, that little clip of graffiti lives. I had fun pulling these strands together. Maybe a few of them forced and a few of them just kind of flowing out. But it's stuff like this that makes me feel like there might even be a purpose behind the no purpose of stuff. Because underneath it all, I just feel like all of this is connected. And if I could just figure out how I could unlock the key to something so much greater and at the same time so much less than my oh so very finite lived experiences.